Hello, welcome to Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery. So today's talk is on dealing with rejection and finding equanimity. Dealing with the ups and downs of life and not getting blown off course, so to speak, or depressed, dealing with that. So, human connection and feeling appreciated, seen, acknowledged is a really important part of human life because we're wired for connection. So rejection can be very devastating, especially if you have a predisposition for that rejection sensitivity in your childhood, which can sometimes come about as a reaction to a parent dying or someone being abandoned, or a parent that wasn't emotionally available to you, or had a favorite child. That kind of, if you didn't have that secure bond, you can be extremely sensitive to rejection. And sometimes you can read into people's not liking you, or just, not acknowledging you. You can take that as more than it is. And it can lead to a sense of, it can trigger people's past trauma, and it can lead to reactions like social isolation, depression, people pleasing, like having no boundaries, bending over backwards to try and be accepted. Or it could also lead to anticipatory hostility. So it's like, you don't like me? Screw you. I don't need you. Rejecting people before they reject you, basically. And really, it's not because you're a bad person. It's because you're afraid of being rejected yourself, because you've experienced abandonment in the past and haven't had a secure attachment. And we can all feel rejected or depressed at certain times. It's very human, and it's a rough part of life that we often just don't get what we expected, and that people are a bit unreliable, But people might leave us or reject us for their own reasons that have nothing to do with us. And it's also just part of life that, I'm just going to move this down a bit, that people's personalities don't always match, or they don't have the same vision, they don't work the same way, they don't work together well. Or, for your own growth, or your own needs, you might leave someone, and it has nothing to do with them, but more to do with your own journey and your own needs, because people will only stay in a relationship, whether it's a friendship or a business or a marriage, if both their needs are being met. Yeah. And people change, So, so social belonging is critical to health. It's actually the highest marker for long life, is social connection. Not obesity, not smoking, not drinking, social connection. So also, if your relationships are continuously being, there's always, things are breaking down, there's always ruptures in your relationship, then you might need to look at, am I doing something? Am I hard to be around? Am I always complaining or negative? Or it's one thing to just be authentic and say how you feel, but it's another thing to just always put that on others, Or am I extremely needy? Do I have codependency? It's not a bad thing to always, if it just happens a couple of times, but if it's always happening, then it might be a good idea to reflect and seek therapy, which we all need probably. Or, if people say, I can't come today, but maybe in a few months, or we can't work together on this project, but maybe, in a year, and we take that as like a devastating blow, and we take it to mean more than it is. And, if you're someone who works for yourself, or you are in a trade that is a very rare trade, that's not like an artist that relies on other people's patronage, and maybe you do something very rare that's not very popular, you could take people's lack of interest personally as well, you know. But you might just need to recognize maybe this isn't something I could make a living from where I live, like being a prima ballerina in the wheat belt, you know, or a vegetarian in an abattoir town, you know, like trying to open up a vegetarian restaurant in a redneck town where everybody works at the abattoir, you know, or like opening up a branch of World Wildlife Fund in a logging town, you know. So, or, you know, being a Buddhist nun in the Bible Belt. Yeah. So sometimes it's not just about you, it's about the culture around you and how common, what is the, you know, the desire and interest in whatever it is you're doing. You know, are you surrounded by people that have something in common with you? All of those things. You know, I think some queer people can feel quite socially isolated and rejected in a country town, because especially I've known some queer people who grew up in a country town, and it's really hard because they'll fall in love with straight people because there aren't a lot of gay people, there aren't a lot of openly gay people around, you know, which can make you feel quite rejected. And there's so many other reasons, like being neurodiverse, borderline personality disorder, avoidant attachment style, codependency. All of these reasons might, or especially if someone has borderline personality disorder or some kind of personality disorder, they have extremely thin skin. So they're extremely sensitive to, they might take things more than they are, you know, and it's hard for them to process emotion and rejection. So they can feel constantly rejected, actually. And yeah, like we also might have a pattern of going to other emotionally unavailable people or people with intimacy issues because of childhood trauma, you know, because of unhealthy patterns of attachment that were modeled to us, you know. And maybe like we don't feel like it's love unless there's drama. Like if somebody's emotionally available to us, suddenly we're not interested because there's no drama, you know, because we don't know what a secure attachment looks like. Yeah. So, yeah, a parent leaving, losing a loved one, being taken from your family, always treated as second place. These feelings of rejection and trauma can create problems in bonding later on. And these can lead to deep-seated feelings of jealousy, sadness, loneliness that are triggered again and again in the present day. You know, for example, like the job market these days is so insecure. You know, there's no such thing as a lifelong job anymore. And people can apply for different jobs and get rejected and feel really depressed about it. Someone who's had a secure childhood attachment will just, you know, shake it off like water off a duck's back. Whereas someone who has had maybe a disadvantaged childhood or a lot of trauma will take it very personally and get depressed and not feel like putting themselves out there again. And, you know, there is invisible handicaps, like being neurodiverse is definitely a handicap in the sense of being able to read body language in an interview, knowing if someone's liking you, and then someone can ask you something you're very interested in and you'll just give them way more information than they wanted because that's a neurodiverse trait, right? Even people with borderline personality disorders, which mostly come from childhood trauma, their behavior does not usually fall within the norm. So it may be hard for so-called normal people to understand their behavior, and that can also isolate them. Or, you know, if you're highly intelligent, highly creative, there's just so many reasons why we might find it hard to find people like us or who appreciate us. You know, if you're an activist and you're making people confront something they don't want to see, like sexism, climate change, poverty, injustice, racism, it's probably going to drive a bit of a wedge. Or, you know, someone who's got to raise money, it can also make people be like, oh, not her again. You know, it can be hard. It can be hard. So, yeah, and if you're repeatedly rejected, it can affect your self-esteem. Also, like being older, being disabled, being poor, being larger size. There are just, yeah, there are so many, being different to the people around you. There are so many reasons why we might experience rejection. Um, yeah. And so sometimes low self-esteem can also come with it can lead to low self-esteem, and it can also come with a lack of boundaries because you have been given the message that your social connection is not valuable, that you're not valuable, and we can internalize that. And and therefore we start looking for that rejection because it's basically deep ingrained in us. You're not valuable because of something that happened to us a long time ago. It can also happen if you have social anxiety. You can feel that connecting with others is not safe. So that can lead to rejection as well. But sometimes we look for people that will reject us to basically confirm the idea that we're not good enough and we're not lovable and we're not valuable. You know, yeah. So, and they did a survey, and they found that rejection can be the same as physical pain. Like people who experience rejection literally experience it the same as physical pain. Because if you think about it, in a Neolithic time, a person who was rejected out of the tribe died. They died alone in the snow or something, So it's a pretty serious thing to be rejected, and it can really trigger like really primitive survival instinct, you know? Um, but yeah, there's a few things that we can do with rejection. And the first thing is get therapy and examine our own, and just also, equanimity, which is a big part of Buddhism, which is understanding that there is suffering in life and, examining our expectations, understanding that other people also suffer and are chaotic and have trouble managing their lives. So that, the fact that people don't always show up emotionally or physically may not be because you're unlovable, but because life is chaotic and they're busy and they're having a hard time managing their own life. It's very hard to make someone else happy when you yourself are struggling to find your own happiness and the pace of life. It's not always about you. It's just that, people struggle in life, that struggle is part of life. Making sure that you have realistic expectations, and that everybody is on their own journey. So, yeah, first of all is acceptance. Like maybe you can just write down your feelings, because sometimes you can be left with some really strong feelings, and just write them down and make sure they're in perspective. How do I feel about that? Am I triggered? And is it because of what they actually did or said? And if you immediately say something and react without thinking, am I actually reacting in proportion to what has happened, or am I triggered by past events? And it's much more easy for these kinds of things to happen when you're writing on social media or you're communicating by email rather than in person. Because if I can see someone's face in person and I know them well, I'll probably know, it was just an off the cuff thing they said. They didn't really mean anything by it. But if it's on social media or by email, it's just so much easier for our projections around what we think a person means. Like recently I was involved in an email group of activism, and I thought the group was about activism, but other people were just part of the group because they wanted to socialize, and other people were part of the group because it was like the family they never had. So I realized, and then I said, let's do some activism, and I said it in maybe a bit of a preachy way, like, oh, there's people dying in Africa and we should do something kind of like that. Like we shouldn't just write academic papers, which offended some people. We should actually do something. And other people were like, we're already doing something. And And I realized that everybody was in the group, like they had a really negative reaction to what I said. And I realized, one, I hadn't said it in a skillful way. And two, that everybody was in the group for different reasons and they weren't in the group for the same reasons I was. So it's a big mistake to assume. Assume makes an ass of you and me. Yeah, it's a big mistake to assume that other people are there for the same reasons. And it's always good to check in with people, like in a social movement, you know, why are you here? What are we about? Because we couldn't even decide a name for the group, you know, and that to me should have been like a red flag, like, okay, people view this very different, like maybe they view it as a chat group or a group of friends, not a circle of activists that can achieve something, you know. So yeah, you need to understand people come to something because they have their own reasons, and there has to be a way that, you know, a similar vision. And I felt extremely rejected that people reacted so negatively to what I thought was a call to action. And it really made me question, you know, and really made me take it hard, you know. And then I realized, wow, I have a lot of unpacked issues around rejection. And part of that is because my father died when I was 14. And it was like a huge abandonment. So I have abandonment issues, you know, and sometimes I'm an activist as well, which doesn't always make me popular. It makes me popular with people who like the things I like, and maybe people who don't like the things I like, it can antagonize them. So sometimes I have this habit of going into places with a bit of hostility, like, yeah, like projecting that, oh, you're, you know, before someone's even said very much, like, okay, so you're against me then because you don't agree with this and you're a misogynist. And like, I've already written them off before they've even opened their mouth, because I'm protecting myself from the inevitable rejection I think I'm going to get. Because if you speak about rape and sexism, you're going to get a lot of pushback, and you're going to see, because men like to put an outspoken woman in her place, and you're going to see that everywhere. Unfortunately, if you're very much aware of these issues, you're going to see it. But that looking for that trauma and that badness in the world is also a trauma response. So it's important to not let the issue that you advocate for own you, in the sense that you know how to switch off. You know how to switch off if you're a social worker, or if you're just a kind friend who listens to friends who have trouble, you know, and not carry it around with you all the time, so that you're always looking for it, you know, and that you're fresh in the moment, open to the good as well as the bad, which we all know there's a lot of, you know. Yeah, so also part of how we can make peace with rejection and with the ups and downs of life is just understanding that sometimes personalities are mismatched, that people are not interested in the same things. You know, it's been hard for me to accept that a lot of people don't care about the work I do in India. A lot of people don't care if there's starving kids, you know, because they haven't seen it for themselves, and it's not their kid, right? It's not someone from their country. It's not right in front of their face. Whereas I've seen it, I'm connected to those people, I can't forget. And that a lot of people are fighting silent battles, you know, maybe especially these days, you know, a lot of people financially struggling. You know, a lot of the problems that we thought were third world problems are now here, you know, and people have mental health issues, and, you know, they're just really busy and overwhelmed by their family and everything. There's just so many reasons why somebody might not, you know, sponsor a child or come to a fundraising event, you know, but still I'm trying to do this and I'm trying to advocate for this. So it's still hard when you experience that rejection, you know. Yeah, and, you know, sometimes not getting what you expect is part of life, and it's necessary to respect others' boundaries, as long as other people are not being abusive. Like if somebody's being a bigot, then you can push back on that. But trying to convince someone to love you or accept you or care is pretty much a waste of your energy, you know. So keep looking for the ones who are open and do care, rather than the ones who are it's going to take a long time and a really skillful dialogue to work with people who are not resonating with you, are not on the same page, you know, and that requires a really specific skill set. So it's better to seek people who are like you know, rather than banging on the doors of people who have closed the door in your face. And also not putting, it's a really hard thing. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it, but not putting your self-value on how someone else treats you. Because if someone is treating you badly, that doesn't mean that you don't deserve respect. And I wish I could remember this famous writer. She wrote, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And she's a famous poet. She wrote some amazing poetry as well. Anyway, she said, you know, you need to know to walk away from the table when love is no longer being served. You know, and sometimes that is a great act of taking your power back. You know, when someone is treating you like garbage, when someone isn't demonstrating respect. And yeah, so another thing is self-compassion, you know, and it's probably a lifelong project to reparent yourself and to give yourself the understanding and space and love that you didn't receive from parents, because often our own parents had intergenerational trauma, and how can you know, create something you never had? That's, you know, that's where therapy comes in, and relearning everything. Because especially if we think a lot of people, boomer parents, a lot of boomers, their parents were in the Second World War. And the Second World War, that their generation, their idea of parenting was, you got a roof, you got food, why are you complaining? You know, no one said anything about emotional safety and, you know, debriefing and what's all this, you know, namby-pamby. Yeah, so it takes probably a lot of work, a lot of inner work to reparent yourself and to know what healthy love looks like, what healthy relationships look like. And first and foremost, the great love of your life must be yourself, because that is the person who won't leave. Yeah, and the person whose acceptance and love you most need is yourself, you know, and they're, regardless of whether you don't meet normal beauty standards, or you don't have a lot of money, or you're not well educated, or whatever, there is a part of you that is timeless, that is beyond gender, that is worthy of love and indestructible and precious. And the beauty of spiritual teachings is to make you uncover that. And, you know, once you uncover that natural dignity, it's so much easier to love yourself. And it's not a fake kind of love. Like, I sit with a lot of people doing loving kindness, and for some of them, it's so much easier to develop loving kindness for a puppy or their auntie than for themselves, because from childhood, it's like, we're not good enough. We're not enough. Just being ourselves, you know, we're not enough. And it takes a certain kind of courage to be yourself when you know that maybe others won't like you for who you really are. But and when we say who you really are, we mean at the deepest level. Doesn't mean being immovable or stubborn, in the sense that, you know, it's like, I'm just going to be who I am and I don't give a shit what you feel. You know, that's like, it's one thing to reclaim your boundaries and be honest and set down healthy boundaries, but it's also good to have empathy. And it's a fine line for pleasers, for people who've grown up with a codependent, you know, bending over backwards, being a pleaser. So they set boundaries and they reclaim their independence. And it's a big thing for them to say what they need and to put down boundaries and to say no. And then it's another step to, okay, do it with kindness, do it with empathy, and then also compromise. Because for someone who's been stuffing down all their feelings and was abused, it's a big thing to learn to say no and to walk away and to set healthy boundaries. But the next step of growth there is to learn to compromise and have relating in a healthy way that respects you and respects the other person. That's a real, it's like a seesaw. You've got to find that middle point where you're both sitting balanced and you're both getting your needs met and there's mutual respect. And also, some people are introverts, so they're not always going to want to hang out with you, and that's not to say that they don't love you. It just means they have different needs. Everybody has different needs in terms of how they relate as well. So, the ultimate antidote to this, I think, is connecting with your own goodness, connecting with your own wisdom mind, where you go beyond thought and you go beyond gender and you go beyond all the things that have happened to you, and you connect with that primordial love, that big love, that true nature, that real peace. But that is, for some people, that is pie in the sky. And that's why we say we are traumatized in relationship and therefore we need to heal in relationship as well. But it's not easy to find people with the time and the patience to help you heal, so we do the best we can. But I think part of the job of a monk or a nun actually is to be there for community. And that often means being there for people who have strange relational issues. But at the same time, a monk or a nun is not a therapist. So it's like we do what we can, but we can't save everyone, and we have our own needs as well. Because I certainly have felt the pressure of living up to the expectations, the tremendous expectations people have of a spiritual teacher. And I know that I fall short of those standards every day, but I'd rather be authentic and preserve my own humanity, a bit of space for my own humanity and my own quirks, than to wear a facade and have some kind of strange devious behavior pop out, like an affair or some kind of weird stuff, because I wasn't able to be honest about who I am and my own frailties. But hopefully my own frailties are because they're open, under control, so that I'm not inappropriate. And equanimity is a Buddhist teaching. Equanimity does not mean numbness or not caring or apathy, but it just means understanding that good and bad both happen and that everything is impermanent and that people are messed up, and to not expect too much from them, and to try and find your source of peace and connection and security first and foremost in your own mind, and purify your own mind and do your inner work, so that then you can become a refuge for others, as a mature, well-adjusted individual. And for many of us, not all of us start at the same place in life. Some of us have had to come further than others in terms of healing, ourselves. Some of us have had more trauma than others, more adversity than others. And we should never judge, because we just don't know where someone started out. Like, they might be unbearable, but wow, they could have started out somewhere even worse, And so to have a bit of empathy and a bit of compassion, because you just don't know what people are going through, how they suffer. And so this idea that life is not going to be perfect, life has suffering, there is adversity, and to try and grow from it, like the rose grows from the compost. That is the attitude. But the equanimity is also about like understanding, we call someone a friend when they do stuff for us and we connect with them, and they don't threaten our sense of who we think we are. They confirm it. They make us feel good about it, right? So we latch onto them and we call them friend. But you know, they started out as a stranger and they could also become an enemy if they do something we don't like. So even the label of friend, enemy, and stranger is very subjective. You know, like even the person we don't like probably goes home to someone who loves them, you know, and we might passionately disagree on a certain issue, but they might be still a good person, you know. So it's important to understand that what we can see of someone is just the top of the iceberg of who they are. And we shouldn't completely write someone off, because really, like, we passionately love our friends and then we passionately dislike, or we don't care about someone who does nothing for us, and we dislike someone who challenges our sense of who we are, you know. But without people who challenge us, we don't grow, and our friends could become strangers and strangers can become friends. So it's important to understand these labels we give people are very changeable and very subjective, and we also are changing, you know. And sometimes someone gives us a label because of their own past trauma history that might not be anything to do with who we are. I certainly know the power of projection as a spiritual teacher, you know, because I know people project stuff onto me because of the robes. My teacher gave me some really good advice when I ordained. He said, don't believe the people who bow to you. They're bowing to the robe, not to you. Don't get a big ego, you know. And that was really good advice. And he also said, people don't come to Buddhist centers because they're happy. They come because they're suffering and they're a bit messed up, you know. So have compassion and don't expect too much from them. Yeah, but equanimity grows like when you can release holding on so much, you know, with too much expectation. Because if there's something you can't change, there is no point in trying to keep banging on it. You know, you either have to accept it or let go of it. But to keep trying to change something that won't change, it's very hard. You have to accept they're stuck there. Maybe they won't change. Like, for example, people who are into conspiracy theories. It's really pointless to argue with them and show them data, you know. So just because those conspiracy theories give them comfort and help them deal with anxiety and give them a sense of communal belonging. So it's better to just be a good friend and keep your relationship with them. And maybe over time, once a year, you might just say, oh, look, here's one article about that. What do you think? Rather than like just trying to argue with them all the time. Totally pointless, you know, or just agree to disagree. Like, I love you. Let's talk about the things we like that we have in common. And let's not talk about that issue because we know it's a dung show and it's never going to work. Yeah. And equanimity is also just recognizing that everybody has Buddha nature. Everybody has something good in them, even if it's not apparent in this life. They have the seed of Buddha nature, and that people can change. People are the result of cultural, social, economic conditions, you know, and if you change those conditions, they can also change. And even if they don't change in this life, there are some people we might need to just get out of our life because we can't help them, but we still pray for them from a distance as well, you know, because someone probably like Hitler needs more prayers than someone who we don't like just because I don't know, they believe in the wrong God or whatever, you know, that we think is not the right God, you know, but maybe they're still a good person. Yeah, so I think that's my talk on dealing with rejection. And I think, yeah, try and find the goodness inside yourself and rejoice in the good actions you've done, because that can really give you peace of mind. And don't be stubborn, you know, like in the sense that we create this identity around being rejected, you know, like it can happen with activists, or especially it happens in the queer community. Like people create an identity based on rejection. Like I'm an environmentalist, so I expect every room I go into that there's going to be people who will reject me because I advocate for this, you know, to not create an identity around woundedness, but to always try and see the common ground that everybody's standing on. It's not easy. It's not easy because they're really, if you're trying to do good, there will be obstacles in the way. And calling out that behavior, you know, this is racism, this is abuse, that's not a bad thing. But just know when to switch off so that fight does not become all that you are, and that you've lost your sense of joy in living, that you can't be fresh in the moment, you know, because you're laying down, because we have too much preconceived ideas because of our past trauma. We're not fresh in every moment, and we're literally reenacting our trauma every moment because we've become so bound up with our pain and our identity, and we've created an identity around our pain and our trauma, like that's all that we are, you know. So I mean, it happens when you have cancer. It's so annoying. Like, people who never come and see me will be like, you know, how are you? How's your cancer? And it's like, I don't want you to ask about my cancer if you never come and have coffee with me. You know, I don't exist for you to just, to give you drama and entertainment and feel better about yourself that you don't have cancer. You can either be my friend or don't be my friend, but please don't constantly ask me about having cancer. Because I'm more than that. I'm more than an illness, you know. So be my friend or don't be my friend, but don't constantly ask me about that, because that's not all that I am. Or it's like when like people are obsessed with losing weight, and they're like, you look good, you've lost weight, you know, as if you exist to just lose weight, you know, like. So treat people as a whole human, you know, and treat yourself as a whole human. Love yourself as a whole human, you know. I remember the first time I lost a whole bunch of weight, and I just realized who was my friend and who wasn't my friend. And I just realized it was such a shallow measure for the value of a human being. You know, I was like, wow, I've lost this whole bunch of weight and I don't feel any different. Like, self-love has nothing to do with my body size. And the people who are valuing me because I'm thin are shallow and not worth my time. And the people who love me at any size are probably the people worth investing in, you know. And really, it was a lesson in kind of real love and preconceived ideas about value. Yeah. So that's equanimity. Do you have any questions, comments, queries?
I thought that was a wonderful talk. I thought you were talking about me.
Oh.
But then also I thought you were talking about yourself.
I am, yeah.
And I can see with that talk that it probably was good for all of us.
Affects everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bits of it.
Yeah, we all get
Do
rejected.
you remember the day I said to you, do you love yourself? And you said, I don't know.